Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're looking at something pretty fascinating and honestly, maybe a little bit surprising. We're talking about a hidden risk that's lurking in pretty much every kitchen out there, both professional and at home. We all know the basics of food hygiene, right? Wash your hands, cook the chicken all the way through. But emerging research is pointing to a completely unseen element that's literally sneaking onto our plates. I'm really excited to unpack this data with you because it's going to fundamentally change how you look at a totally everyday kitchen staple. So let me just ask you this. What invisible ingredient is being added to your food every single time you prep a meal? It's not salt, it's not some rogue spice, and it is definitely not on the recipe card. We usually think about food contamination as like bacteria or chemical sprays, but what we're looking at today is a total Trojan horse hiding right in plain sight. It's a completely mundane kitchen item that is fundamentally altering what we ingest on a daily basis. Just so we're all on the exact same page, let's set our scale here. We are talking about microplastics. By definition, these are little plastic fragments smaller than 5 millimeters. But the data we're looking at pushes us to look even closer, down into nanoplastics. These guys are unbelievably tiny, measuring less than 1 single micrometer. Now, we already know these come from packaging, synthetic clothes, water bottles, but as you'll see in a second, one of the absolute most direct routes into our food is happening right there on your kitchen counter. Okay, let's dive into how this actually happens. Every single time your kitchen knife strikes a plastic cutting board, it makes a microscopic scratch. The physical force of that blade literally shaves tiny plastic fragments, most of them way smaller than 100 micrometers, straight off the surface of the board. And where do they go? They mix right into your carrots, your celery, or whatever else you're chopping up for dinner. Sure, some might get washed off, but a lot of them just stay firmly attached to your food. Now, this isn't just some wild hypothesis. The real turning point here comes from some solid forensic evidence published in a landmark 2023 study in the journal Environmental Science and Technology. The researchers definitively prove that plastic cutting boards are not just passive surfaces. They're an active, highly significant source of microplastic contamination during completely normal everyday kitchen use. It totally flips the script, doesn't it? It redefines the cutting board from just a neutral background tool into an active variable in food safety. And the researchers didn't stop at just proving this happens. They actually compared different types of plastics to see which one was the worst offender. And wow, the results were pretty dramatic. When they compared polypropylene, which is often just called PP, to polyethylene, or PE, they found that the polypropylene boards released 5 to 60% more microplastic by mass. That is a massive variance, just based entirely on the specific type of plastic you happen to grab off the store shelf. But wait, if we look at the actual particle count, that gap widens even further. Polypropylene releases 14 to 71% more individual plastic particles than polyethylene does. So, when you're rapidly chopping up veggies or slicing meat, the exact chemical makeup of the board beneath your knife is basically dictating exactly how much synthetic material is joining your meal. And this brilliantly illustrates exactly how the researchers got to those numbers. What you're looking at is a breakdown of a standardized cutting simulation they ran in the lab. Basically, they standardized 5,000 cuts with a stainless steel blade, and the results? Completely dramatic. The polypropylene board sheds roughly 60% more particles and a lot more mass overall, compared to the polyethylene board. Seeing the data laid out visually like this really drives the point home, doesn't it? So what does this all mean for a regular person over the course of, say, a year? Well, based on those standardized tests, the researchers estimate that frequent users could be exposed to millions of these plastic particles annually. Millions. And that's strictly from cutting boards alone. Now, to be fair, these estimates are based on lab assumptions, and scientists are still actively debating the exact numbers, but the core fact is totally undeniable. Plastic boards shed when you use them. And over a year, that shedding adds up to a staggering amount of plastic. All right, let's zoom out for a second and look at where those particles actually end up. And we have to approach this with strict scientific neutrality. Science has definitively detected the presence of microplastics inside the human body. We're talking blood, lung tissue, the liver, kidneys, and even the placenta. They are absolutely absorbing into the human system. So the detection of these particles is a confirmed scientific reality. But, and this is a big but, the mere presence of a particle doesn't automatically mean it's causing a disease. Which brings us to a very, very crucial distinction in the research. The actual health consequences of this are still under active scientific investigation. Scientists are impartially studying whether this chronic long-term exposure contributes to things like chronic inflammation, gut microbiome disruption, hormone or endocrine disruption from the plastic additives, or even cardiovascular disease. But it is absolutely essential to understand that while researchers are actively looking for these links, they are not yet proven causes of disease in humans. We know for sure the plastic is there, we're just still learning exactly what it's doing. Now, taking this science out of the lab and into the real world, let's look at the macro scale, the professional kitchen. If a home cook is shedding millions of particles a year, a commercial kitchen is facing what we can basically call a massive multiplier effect. Think about it. A busy restaurant or a hospital kitchen isn't just making a dozen cuts a day for a family dinner. They are executing hundreds, maybe even thousands of cutting operations every single day. And because of that heavy, relentless chopping, commercial boards just wear out significantly faster. The sheer force creates these incredibly deep grooves in the plastic over time. And here's the kicker. Not only do these older, deeply grooved boards release a way higher volume of microplastic particles, but they also create a secondary food safety nightmare. Those grooves act like little traps for food residues and bacteria, making the damaged surfaces incredibly difficult to clean and sanitize. It's essentially a compounding risk of both plastic and microbial contamination. Let's move to and see how this builds into actionable solutions, because the goal here definitely isn't to cause panic. It's about implementing practical, smart hygiene. A foundational best practice that a lot of pros use is the color-coded cutting board system. You know, red for raw meat, blue for seafood, green for veggies, and white for ready-to-eat foods. This is absolutely your first line of defense to stop the cross-contamination of bacteria, which, as we just talked about, is especially critical when you're dealing with boards that might have those microscopic, hard-to-clean grooves. Building on that, here is an immediate, highly practical action checklist for managers, or even just for your own home kitchen. These are simple, low-cost steps you can take right now within existing food safety frameworks. It includes doing monthly visual inspections and just immediately removing any boards with deep grooves or cracks. Don't wait. It also means setting up a written replacement cycle based on how heavily the board is used, rather than just waiting until it looks like it's falling apart. And finally, training staff or yourself on proper knife techniques to avoid applying excessive heavy force that needlessly destroys the board in the first place. Which brings up a really major operational question. Should you just keep buying new plastic boards, or should you upgrade to wood? Well, right now, there is no universal mandate to ban plastic boards. Food safety authorities completely permit them as long as they're properly maintained and swapped out when they get worn down. But a lot of experts are suggesting we evaluate high-quality, food-grade hardwood or bamboo as an alternative. Wood definitely has its own sanitation requirements, of course, but it completely removes the plastic shedding variable from the equation. So it really comes down to balancing food safety, durability, and what's practical for you. Honestly, if there is one key takeaway from all of this research, it is this. The strongest evidence supports taking practical, low-cost steps to reduce exposure while the scientific community continues to study the health effects. At the end of the day, this is all about empowering yourself with knowledge. You have the agency to swap out heavily worn boards and maintain great hygiene today. You don't have to wait for a decade of health studies to conclude before you take control of your own kitchen. Which leaves us with a final thought to chew on. We've seen the science, we've seen how the knife physically shaves the plastic, and we've walked through the practical solutions. So next time you pull out your cutting board to prep a meal, what practical step will you take to keep the plastic off the plate? Are you going to finally toss that deeply grooved board you've been holding on to for years? It's such a small change, but as we've learned in this explainer, it can make a massive difference in what you're actually eating. Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive.